And let's get started. So, I'll start this question. One of my questions to you is how can you bridge the gap between the campus and the first responders in our community, which is the Seattle Police Department, Fire Department, etc. If you can speak to that.
Well, I think one of the most effective legitimate means that I have is my tenure with the Washington State Patrol and the fact that I worked the highway there between North Gate and both floating bridges for nearly 10 of my 15 years on the job. And so I came to know the agency exceptionally well. And in fact, my best friend I've known for 40 years now just recently retired from the Seattle Police Department after 41 years of service out of the North Precinct. His name was Sergeant Alan Bernstein. And so over beers, we've had exceptional conversations about the culture of the agency and how it compares with my own, as well as some of the challenges that they have traditionally faced with the campus. And I know for a fact that one of Sergeant Bernstein's major concerns was parking there on campus, and the fact that he fears that the new pedestrian bicycle bridge is going to be a temptation, if you will, for neighbors to take advantage of parking on the west side of the freeway, walk over the bridge, and then take the transit system directly downtown, because there isn't going to be a tremendous amount of parking available on the east side of the bridge. And so that I think is going to make things a little bit tenuous for staff and students on campus. But to answer your question, it's just a matter of familiarity and experience and knowing the culture of the agency, and also knowing sort of how police officers think, but also being a emergency preparedness specialist. I've had a chance to really cut my teeth with agencies all over the Puget Sound. And one develops a reputation over time as being either exceptionally effective at what they do, and they develop those effective networking opportunities, or they fail miserably and they develop a reputation that really hampers their ability to be effective. So I believe that I have the tools and the talents necessary, as well as the connections, to be very effective in the role.
Thank you. You mentioned emergency preparedness specialist. How would you s- um, design the drills that each college should have quarterly, so it's more engaging and brings in the students and that kind of feedback that we will need as we repair our emergency preparedness. So,
Well, the interesting thing I've learned over the many years in emergency preparedness is that you never reach nirvana. You never truly reach that point where everything is perfect and you can sort of rest on your hands and say to yourself that you've got a program and a system that is absolutely sort of impenetrable with respect to being effective and engaging. Um, Unfortunately, because we have more or less a commuting population on the campus, there's a great temptation that in the event of an emergency for the students to just simply disappear. So unlike say a high school or an elementary school, where kids are being held, if you will, on campus as we serve in loco parentis, in absence of the parents, we have a duty and responsibility to sort of confine those kids on campus and make sure that we can be held accountable for every one of them. On a public campus like North Seattle, obviously, you're going to have people in the event of a crisis who see it either as an opportunity to abandon their classes for the day and skip the rest of their schedule, or just decide that they don't want any part whatsoever of any potential problems on campus. And so they flee out of interest of protecting themselves or their property. And so, how do we account for those people when they were in class prior to the alarm? And then when they gather again after the all clear is sounded, the instructor finds that they're short 9 people. Are those people injured? Are they missing? Are they traditionally held as unaccountable, or did they just take off because they'd had enough? So to try to make it engaging on a college campus with adults, I think the key is to make sure, number one, that it ends in some kind of success so that you set yourself up to be successful and sort of take steps progressively to always move towards nirvana so that you can improve on existing programs. But at the same time, they have to be small enough that staff can really consume and appreciate and absorb the information that's shared, the lessons that are learned, and they can add to their experience base and their sense of confidence about the program and then move forward from there. So to make a really effective plan successful on campus, I'd need to do a lot of talking with those individuals that have had an active role in the plan, because what's written and what I've read about the campus plan looks great on paper. But I need to know if whether or not that plan is going to survive first contact in the event of a real crisis. And that information is going to come from small group discussions and valuable one-on-one conversations with folks who can tell me really the truth about how successful they are and give me a sense, I think, of how the staff perceives the drills and whether or not they're helpful or whether they're just truly bothersome and disruptive and they don't see any value in them. So I'd hit the ground running, but I'd also be very pensive about doing anything drastic at the beginning until I had a real strong sense and could kind of get my arms around the issue as a whole in order to be successful in developing a plan that meets our needs, but doesn't cause so much disruption in the classroom and the operations of the campus that people really resent them.
Okay. So I shouldn't be the only one. There we go. Thank you, Tony. Can you share with us your leadership style?
I like to think of myself as an enabler, and that means that I meet every single person and look for the unique gifts or talents that they possess, and then I try to capitalize on what those are, especially for staff that are working with me or for me or under me, whatever term you want to use. I like to be able to find out what their interests and their passions are, because if they have the opportunity to do the things that they really love doing, they're going to be a lot happier doing it. At the same time, I have a responsibility as a leader to be able to take responsibility for a situation that is truly mine and not be tempted, as is often the case in public service, to sort of point fingers at other people if things go wrong. Success has always been shared success from my experience. But boy, when you fail, it really needs to be the leader's responsibility for that failure. Success is never an island, but I'll tell you, failure
Mhm.
always is. And for me, the key is to make sure that people understand that I'll take responsibility when things go south. And at the same time, when things go well, I'm going to duly credit those individuals that did the work because I don't like the spotlight. I don't like the attention. I hate birthday parties for that reason. I love celebrating other people's big events, but for me, I just as soon kind of shrug into the corner when the attention's focused on me and point my fingers at the soldiers that really got the work done.
Okay. Here is a Tony Stankovich sent another question. Another leadership question, hypothetical scenario. If the officers have applied a boot to a vehicle of a student who has multiple ticket offenses, and it was learned that someone above you forgave the fees and offense, how do you handle it regarding the loss of faith among your staff while also supporting leadership?
Wow. Well, I'm not familiar with the policy for boots. Um, Generally, it takes a fairly substantial violation, I know, in the city of Seattle before those boots are applied because they are not only exceptionally costly, but they also serve as a real deterrent to that individual getting to where they potentially really have to be. So when they're applied, they have to be done so dutifully and certainly fairly. If I found out later that those fees had been waived, then obviously I do the best I could to try to sort of soften the blow. But I also believe that as a leader, I have a responsibility sometimes to make tough decisions, as I did as a state trooper, without any supervision, without any prior knowledge, knowing full well that the entire burden of that decision is going to fall on me long after the Monday morning quarterbacks have a chance to evaluate all the facts and circumstances that maybe I wasn't privy to. So it's a difficult question to answer, but boots, from my experience, are sort of a last resort. I think that I'd do everything I could to try and sit down with that particular violator, for lack of a better term, and find out what the circumstances are and find out how we might be able to find some way for them to avoid that kind of not only financial penalty, but that ultimate penalty of being booted. Um, Last check, I think it was pretty close to $400 in the city of Seattle if you get booted to get it removed by a private company.
Thank you. Marianne put a question in. What's going to be the routine for your staff on a day-to-day basis?
That I don't know. I mean, I've got to find out exactly what the past precedence is, what the expectations of staff and students are, the role that they've traditionally played. Are they ideally supposed to be there as a visible deterrent? Are they supposed to be interacting and mingling with students and staff consistently? Is patrolling a high importance? I obviously need to find out what sort of um, decisions were made prior to my arrival as to what kind of expectations were created. I think we have to be realistic about trying to cover 60 plus acres with 3 people, and those folks have to be distributed in a fair and sort of impartial way, while at the same time, as I mentioned, being able to capitalize on what they like doing well so that we can maintain morale within the ranks. But I'd have to get a sense of what kind of role they play. When you say safety and security, it develops and conjures up all sorts of visions depending on who you ask the questions to. And the impression that I get is that our staff there on campus is far more about supporting, advocating, and providing assistance to staff and students than it is enforcing laws or trying to be sort of a private police force on campus.
Thank you. So I also put a question in the chat. What tools, techniques can you give campus security officers that are not armed or can use or cannot or can use non-lethal products? Basically, our security officers cannot be armed or use um, like a taser gun or a baton, for example. So what tools and techniques can you will employ to train staff?
Well, certainly my 15 years in law enforcement, my most effective tool is my voice. And I think it continues to be good common sense and the way one interacts with the individual that you're having conflict with. De escalation is always primarily accomplished through voice and body language. And if things like posture and unattainable threats are made that you can't back up, you lose face. If you try to overachieve and you don't have the support of the organization or your leadership, then you're out there all by yourself, hanging loose for liability and oftentimes much worse. So I think for me, we probably try to focus as best we could on using techniques to de escalate conflict using our voice and common sense, and at the same time making sure that officer safety is primary, that the officers know that our goal and objective is to make sure that they get home at the end of the day safe and ideally in better condition than when they arrived, so that they know that they have the backing of the organization, the administration, and certainly the students in the work that they're trying to do.
Thank you. Um, Parvena, please, I apologize if I cannot pronounce your first name. Do you have any plans for having regular trainings for all of us, and especially for floor wardens? We need more trained floor wardens in case of emergency.
Boy, floor wardens are so crucial because they're the not only the first line of defense in a crisis, but they're also the source of information for staff more so than I would ever be because they're in close contact with their peers every day. So I have to be able to create a legitimacy in the minds of the floor wardens that we have a competent, well conceived, well carried out program that is attainable and achievable in the event that we have an emergency. We don't have the financial resources, nor have we been blessed with time from the administration to really be a fully vested um, organization that really sees emergency preparedness as a priority. It's something that I think most campuses feel they need to pursue. And obviously, from my bias perspective, I'd love to see more time, attention, and teaching and training time be invested in it. But oftentimes, that's not the reality on educational campuses. It's sort of an afterthought. So my intention, to answer the question, is to pursue as much training, as much investment, as much time and effort as I can possibly be blessed and afforded by the administration, to be able to spend that on emergency preparedness. Some people are exceptionally passive and sort of, shoulder shruggers when it comes to emergency preparedness, and other folks are exceptionally passionate and sometimes overly sensitive to the exposure that they feel they are facing every day when they come to campus, because they read the news and social media and they're concerned about their safety. But the reality is, statistically, that school campuses are one of the safest places where both kids and adults can reside, if they're concerned about violence in the workplace. And for me, that's not something to rest on my laurels about, but it does offer a certain amount of comfort knowing that statistically and historically, we do fairly well in comparison to all the other sort of businesses and occupations and activities in society, as an educational facility, and can enjoy a certain amount of peace knowing that we have a campus that is being scrutinized not only by staff
Mhm.
looking for outside threats, but also trained security personnel that can key on behaviors and ideally prevent a tragedy from occurring in the first place.
Great. So the next question is from Kevin Williams, and you touched some of it, touch a little bit of this, but because you have served as an armed sworn officer, how would you prepare your staff for how to respond to an active shooter on the at North Seattle College, given this is not a police department and there are no weapons carried or deployed?
That's a great question, Kevin, and it's a challenging one because for instance, in the Alice program and the active shooter program that I was taught in and continue to teach, police officers are called upon to engage with the shooter at the earliest opportunity. At sort of the birth of my career, the idea was that we would create a cordon around the school and isolate the threat. But the problem was the shooter then would have the opportunity inside the facility to take as many shots as they choose to without real fear of um, interference from police officers. So even a single officer now responding to the shooting on a school campus is called upon to enter that building rather than waiting for backup in an active shooter situation to save lives. So what do you do with an individual who has the title of safety and security officer, but is unarmed other than a radio, to be able to do something good in the event that an active shooter occurs? Um, Things like providing education prior to the event about making sure that doors are locked, especially in classrooms, and that staff know exactly what to do in the event of a crisis. If the announcement is made that there's an active shooter on campus, and I'm hoping you have a public address system or some way to notify everybody on campus, we'd want to make that notice apparent as quickly as possible so that the bad guy or gal knows exactly what is going on, and the fact that the jig is up, that they know that they've been had and they're actively going to be pursued. I wouldn't put a security officer in harm's way. They could certainly serve as a very assertive, sorry?
Sorry, I
Please.
needed an accident. Please continue.
Okay, they could certainly serve as outstanding witnesses to the event, and they can provide information via radio to the administration, who can in turn share that information with law enforcement. But I, for instance, wouldn't expect, nor do I think anybody on campus would expect, an unarmed security officer to necessarily confront an armed shooter as a means of trying to upset the event. Obviously, there is the run, hide, attack mentality that has been trained over the years. And that would be a last resort, is if the shooter confronted a security officer in the course of his work and they had an opportunity to flee or to hide or to fight, that they would do something to disrupt the order in the mind of the shooter by throwing a fire extinguisher or a chair or anything to upset the mentality of power and control that shooter has in that kind of a situation, to hopefully garner some additional time for law enforcement to arrive. I don't know if I answered your question. It's a very gray area, but ultimately I have a responsibility to protect staff, and that includes my own people. And I'm not going to throw them into a combine expecting them to survive an active shooter just because of the title that they hold on campus.
Thank you. Tony Stankovich, also, could you please speak your question, Tony? I think it'll be easier for you to be more clarifying that way. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Hello, Fitz.
Hi, Tony.
Just clarifying my earlier question, you answered the first part of it, but the second part of it was, suppose your supervisor or someone above made a decision that undermined the power of your officers. How do you handle that with your staff and with leadership?
Thanks for that clarification. And I do remember now that part of the question about the boot. Certainly in the Washington State Patrol, it's a very, very much a militaristic chain of command sort of process that, not unlike the military, a soldier, or in my case, a trooper, is expected to obey the lawful dictates of their supervisor. I don't have a problem with an administrator in a position of authority above me who makes a decision that I don't agree with. I'm not going to confront them in public. I'm not going to embarrass them or call them out. But certainly if I had an opportunity to share my concern, maybe my prior knowledge, my experience, my gut with that particular administrator about how I think things might turn out as a result of following that particular path, I'm not afraid to do so. But if it means that I have to be somewhat passive about the authority and the role and the title that they possess, I can certainly humble myself to that extent, as long as it doesn't represent in the long run or the short run injury or damage to myself or my team that I'm responsible for. Did I
Thank
answer
you,
that?
Fitz.
Thanks, Tony.
Kelda, can you unmute, please? I think your question also has a little bit of nuances, and I don't feel I'll do justice if I read it out loud. So if Kelda, if you're still around.
Yes, I'm around. Thanks, Odessa. Hello, Fitz. My name is Kelda Martinson, and I'll get my video on here. Hello.
Hi.
I came in late, so I apologize. And if you already spoke to this, you can feel free to just tell me so. But I'm curious just to hear why you're interested in working alongside students and staff. As art faculty, we've felt that the members in security are very much our collaborators, and love to see them in and around our campus and our classrooms and our studios. We have students that use the studios after hours until late in the evening, and we really rely on that collaborative approach. So I'd love to hear you speak to that a little bit. From what I've heard so far, it's sort of been incident response, which is clearly super important, and I love to hear that, but I'd also like to hear the side when there's no incident to respond to. What's your philosophy, and how do you lead your team in that collaborative spirit?
Great, and thank you for bringing this up, because I think that's 99% of the work, from what I gather, that our staff pursue there on campus, and that is support. For me, I'd mentioned in my first interview that I truly do have a servant's heart. And so pursuing this opportunity for me was just a no-brainer. Having been in law enforcement and also working for over a decade with two of the larger school districts in the state, I've really had an opportunity to find how I can be most effective utilizing my gifts and the talents that I bring to the position as a way of supporting and advocating the larger picture and the bigger issue of educating people and creating a safe environment for those people to learn in. Um, it's wonderful to hear that you perceive our staff there as being sort of a comforting sense of security for your students that maybe need an escort back to their vehicle late at night on a dark night when nobody else is around, and know that they can not only count on that service, but that our safety and security officers welcome the opportunity to bring that kind of comfort and security to individuals, because it makes them feel good, like they're contributing to the well-being of both students and staff. And I learned a long time ago that people will always remember how you made them feel. And in that particular case, there's nothing better than knowing that your physical presence was in a position to be able to provide a sense of security and comfort and safety to an individual enough to where they could get in their car, lock the doors, put their seatbelt on, and drive off campus safely, knowing that they had the full support that was provided willingly and enthusiastically by a safety officer to make sure that they felt good about the services that we provide and the kind of safety they provide. So for me, to get back to your original question, it's just a no-brainer that with my experience in safety, in education, and in emergency preparedness, if I can fill that role as a humble servant with my experiences and my welcoming, ideally perceived as warm personality, then I think I can accomplish a great deal there on campus. And if not, I know that feedback isn't always pleasant, but it's absolutely necessary for anybody in a leadership position to be a good listener. And I welcome that, and it makes me a better and more effective leader, especially when I hear it from my own staff. So I'm not afraid of criticism. I'm not afraid of tough situations. I love chaos. I love juggling multiple things at once. And I love the fact that I could go to work every day and have no idea what's in store for me.
Okay, great. Our next question, Blake, if you are if you can please unmute and
Yeah.
ask that question.
Okay, so just real quick, I'm Blake Pitt. I'm the transportation coordinator here at North Seattle College. And if you were to fill this position, we'd likely be working closely together regarding transportation, parking, emergency preparedness, and the safety risks and challenges associated with that. Police work and our campus security have distinctly and differently defined roles that possess drastically different powers and authority. That being said, what would you do to give the population you would be serving at North Seattle College the same level of trust and confidence that they may have in the local police authorities to the campus security team under your direction? This could be regarding additional training programs, SOPs, policies, et cetera, that you may feel are important to implement.
Thanks for your question. And I too would look forward to working with you. Thanks. In this particular case, again, it's critical, as Kevin knows, to really get a sense of the lay of the land before I make any sort of decision about how I'm going to proceed. Nothing is more disruptive than having a new sheriff come into town with his head puffed out and his chin out, telling everybody that this is the way it's going to be from now on. Quite the contrary for me. I need to make sure that I understand exactly what sort of role and expectation exists in the minds and hearts of staff and students, and at the same time do everything that I can to set an example for the people that I interact with respect to credibility and reliability, honesty and integrity, because once you damage or lose those particular talents or gifts or perceptions, achieving them again, retrieving them again is almost absolutely impossible. So it's crucial that people get to know me one-to-one whenever possible so that they can understand where my heart's at. But creating SOPs and policies is great on paper, but boy, you got to make them come alive. And if it's a pipe dream, if it's unachievable, but it sounds good, if it's unrealistic, but something that staff feel is attainable, then it's something that we'll chase. But I think it's really, really important to have a somewhat restrained approach to change in this kind of role for me, because I need to find out what's worked, what historically has been successful, what historically has failed, and at the same time be realistic about the fact that I think that quite sadly, the assistance that the public has come to expect from law enforcement, especially the Seattle Police Department, has dramatically changed. I think it has depreciated significantly. And I think simple service that we've come to expect in the past is going to be something we're going to have to literally do without. The Seattle Police Department, from the insiders that I've spoken to, have been given drastic orders about, if I could be so honest, drastic orders about how they're going to go about providing service to the public with limited bodies, limited resources, and limiting funds that have made traditional law enforcement, I think, unrealistic for most of the public to expect. So we're going to have to do very, very much on our own, I think, moving forward as a department and as a college when it comes to an expectation of protection and service from law enforcement.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Fitz. So the next question is from Marianne. How would you handle a situation where someone on campus may be experiencing a mental health crisis?
Well, hopefully utilizing the care team, we'd have the opportunity to maybe get ahead of the issue. It might very well be that an instructor has had the opportunity to witness firsthand or maybe had some interpersonal connectivity with an individual who concerned them, and they could bring that up to the care team, and we could do assessments collectively to try and offset a triggering event that could lead to some kind of a crisis in that person's mind that they act out on campus. But with respect to being able to diffuse a mental health crisis for an individual, either a student or a visitor on campus, I think the key is training to be able to provide our staff with techniques and activities, distractions that could sort of deflate the panic or the anxiety in the heart of the individual that they're interacting with. But the key, I think, would be ultimately communication with law enforcement if we did feel that there was an unstable individual on campus. But I can honestly tell you, if we called up 911 today and said that we had a disoriented individual on campus, we could probably expect at least a 30-minute time frame before we'd ever see a uniform. And we'd probably get a phone call after 30 minutes asking if he was still on campus and if he still was misbehaving even before they'd send an officer. So again, we're very much an island when it comes to these kinds of situations. And the only way to really prepare ourselves is to provide the resources to do all that we can to try and minimize the anxiety in the individual, using de-escalation techniques, soft, non-threatening body language, and other means by which we can get them calm to the point where we can reason with them.
Thank you. Fitz, I have a question, and you touched base with your comment about your best friend, concern about the parking on our campus when the bridge opens, that pedestrian bridge opens. So it is our hope that, once the pandemic is over, technically, if that is the right word to use, but as we return to normal operations, that we will start having events on campus. So with that in mind, these big events usually happen on a weekend. and there's some coordination that needs to happen between security, facilities, etc. How would you collaborate with us in regards to transportation and parking and security on weekends? And how would you handle the overtime and how do we get paid for this, that kind of thing for big events on campus?
Well, unfortunately, I'm kind of at a disadvantage because I don't know how that current process operates. But I do know that on weekends, many of the businesses are more than happy to be able to provide us with parking. Oftentimes that comes at a cost. I know that the North Seattle Park and Ride is going to be closed at least until the fall. That option is gone. But again, I think the real challenge that we're going to face is going to be weekdays when commuters are looking for an easy way to get on a quick route downtown, and there's no real substantial location, certainly not in Licton Springs, where you can park your vehicle, hop on board transit or some other means, and head downtown. And so they're going to cheat, and they're going to find every opportunity they can find to sneak somewhere to park their car. And if they live on the west side of I-5, and they can find some way close to that bridge to park, they'll probably take their chances. And we'll have to be swift and fairly substantial on our enforcement of those non-students and staff, those non-students, and be able to send a message clearly to them that we just don't have the luxury of being able to afford them parking for their commute. That they're going to have to find other alternatives to take advantage of mass transit. But as far as overtime and those sorts of things, I obviously would need to talk to folks in the know on campus, find out again what's worked, what's failed, what the administration has sort of blessed and what they've cursed, and try to create a substantial program that works for everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's 2:53, and if folks, if you have any more questions, please post it in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask the question. I think this is a really good opportunity to learn more about Fitz as a potential candidate, as our candidate for Director of Safety and Security.
And I have nowhere to go. So if you want to extend the time frame and folks have that luxury, I can stay as long as the questions are coming out.
Well, maybe this is a good time for you to ask us questions as a community.
Oh, I can't believe with this many people present that there aren't more questions about maybe what I've shared or a bias that I have. Tony's got a question.
Yeah.
Odessa, I had a question in the chat. I'll just say it. Can you please share your experience with Title IX and Clery reporting?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Only what I've read, Tony, because none of my experiences in the past have been in the secondary education arena. I'm a voracious student. I've never stopped learning. I don't think you ever can if you want to continue to excel as an individual and be learned about the world that we're exposed to. So quite honestly, in those particular areas, I'd have to do a lot of reading, a lot of research, and a lot of listening in order to be effective and be able to make sure that not only myself, but all our officers are complying with those mandates, and that I could be eventually a subject matter expert and a resource for staff on campus that have questions about those particular issues. But quite honestly, and to be very frank with you, I've had very little experience other than what I've read briefly about those two particular disciplines. They haven't affected my personal life in any way. They haven't impacted my private life, my professional life in any fashion. But clearly, they drive much of what goes on secondary campuses all across the country.
So I'm gonna, this question might change the direction of this. There are external threats right now with groups, the white supremacists and militias and extremists, in our communities, and their drive to to recruit members and they're looking at college campuses, how would you, educate the campus as a whole about these threats and how to act upon or report those threats to you and up the chain?
I think that North Seattle and certainly Central Seattle and South Seattle colleges, because of the makeup of our student base, I think that we have a far more life educated student body than certainly the University of Washington does. Um, we're talking about a lot of freshmen, a lot of very impressionable young people who have maybe never been away from home before, who find themselves on a major campus with the opportunity to be influenced by outside groups substantially. But I think when you figure the average age of a student at North Seattle College is 31, I like to believe that the potential for influence on those outside groups has probably come and gone. Those people could certainly have current biases that exist, and we could certainly target any sort of ignorance or lack of education and information on the true nature of these groups to those students. But I think that we have a very unique cadre of students that I think are very well versed in the realities of life. And I don't think the threat truly exists at North Seattle College like it would at a place like the University of Washington or Seattle University, where you have younger, more impressionable individuals who maybe are not unlike a sponge, willing to accept and apply what they're told, as opposed to folks that are at North Seattle because they have a purpose-driven pursuit in their lives as a result of their life experiences that they're chasing. And I don't think they're going to be necessarily being intrigued by that low-hanging fruit or that low mentality fruit that these fringe groups like to broadcast. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Well, I certainly had to poke the bear somewhere out there with that comment. I'd love to hear back from the rest of you as to whether or not I'm being a little unrealistic or maybe Pollyanna-ish.
I can just speak to, this is Kelda again, faculty in art, and I do know that we have it on our campus, and our faculty are trying to protect their students and dealing with this in the classroom. So though I wish it weren't happening, it is. And so it would be good to maybe speak to that, because it's an issue that is here.
Well, we're certainly part of the larger world. There's no doubt about that. But I think that as a 3 or 4 person organization within the North Seattle campus, it's pretty difficult for us to be able to truly bring about change. But if you're looking for us to be sort of the foundation of educational information and sort of progressive education about the realities of these groups, we can certainly make that kind of information available to individuals. But if you're talking about the means by which we're changing heads and hearts, I think that's very, very difficult to do without one-on-one sort of interdiction or one-on-one conversations with individuals who are maybe leaning in that direction or tempted to act out on those particular beliefs. But I know that for many of those individuals, it's sort of a dark side to them that they generally don't hide with anybody but their best friends. And those sort of biases and that kind of ignorance is something that they don't share openly and publicly, certainly not with security professionals, but they may subtly let it slip with a staff member that they feel exceptionally close to, or maybe they've developed sort of a kindred relationship with. But as far as being an intelligence gathering entity within the college, I think that's a pretty big ask for any safety and security department to try to overcome.
Thank you. I think that's an emerging, it's not an emerging, it's an issue. It's a very hidden issue. Um, it's something that collectively the campus needs to work on. But in my opinion, they will probably come to you with that question, right? Of how we can deal with it effectively because of your role.
Super. And I'd love to be the propellant behind that sort of education. But as far as being sort of the savior, again, I think it's a pretty big ask. But education in those sorts of disciplines is a very intangible sort of issue because you can't really measure the success of any given program when it comes to internal intelligence or bias of individuals that aren't willing to share it with a larger community. If they're overt about it, absolutely we can take action. But it tends to be a very sort of subconscious bias that oftentimes isn't exposed until a crisis occurs, or they have like-minded knuckleheads with them and they develop a sort of a mob mentality where they feel they're empowered in that respect. But again, it's something that would take education and time on my part to be able to gather intelligence about how prevalent the issue is and talk to key individuals on campus who are sensitive to the threat and want to talk about it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Eustace has asked a question. What is your approach to equity, diversity, and inclusion within your staff and college community at large?
Excellent question, obviously. Well, I had a very, um, I hate to say illustrious, but certainly a non-eventful career as a police officer dealing with conflicts involving race and equity. I never had a complaint filed against me in 15 years. Some might argue that there's no way you can do your job if you never received a complaint. But I've always learned from my infancy and my good old Irish mother that one needs to be colorblind in this world. And at the same time, she used to lecture me over the phone as a young police officer to imagine when I observe a driver breaking the law that, Patrick, it could be the very first time in their life they've ever done it,
Mm-hmm.
and treat them that way. And so for me, it was always about hearing out the individual that was in conflict, of always presenting myself in a very professional, courteous, respectful way, and recognizing that I had the entire reputation of the agency on my shoulders every single time I made a traffic stop because those people talk to each other. And certainly in my day, the Washington State Patrol, I believe, had an exceptional reputation in the public eye as being professional and courteous and fair. I think that's changed over the years. I think anymore, they just look at us as another blue uniform. But the reason I wanted to be a trooper is because I considered them to be the finest, most prestigious agency in the state. And I wanted to augment that. And so for me, I felt a responsibility to maintain that level of objectivity and professionalism and courtesy to everyone I met, regardless of color, background, or attitude.
Okay, thank you. So, Fitz, you have been in this area for 15 years, but give us one of, can you expand or explain your desire to work at North?
I love that moniker, North. I think that what excites me about being involved in secondary education is the fact that I could converse with staff and students much more actively as an adult than I could working in the elementary and high schools in North Shore and in Edmonds. The interaction and the education that comes from being able to talk to people from literally all over the world with all sorts of different life experiences and histories and pursuits and backgrounds, to me is absolutely fascinating. I literally could sit in a courtyard and find myself entertained every day just by asking people to sit down and tell me about where they've come from. So to me, it's selfishly an opportunity for me to learn more about the larger world and to better understand maybe some of the biases that exist in the minds of people talking adults one on one without a uniform, without a gun, without authority to arrest about how they feel about not only the role that we play there on campus, but the larger sense of how they see law enforcement serving them and protecting them and their loved ones in this time of uncertainty. And for me, I have a very passionate place in my heart for police officers because I have been a soldier in the trenches. And I know exactly the kind of criticism and scrutiny and image bashing that has absolutely decimated our ranks when, in fact, our full purified intent has always been about serving people. Changing the flat tire on the little old lady's car in the pouring rain at the convention center on a Friday evening, for me, was the absolute highlight of my day because I knew she was going to go home and tell everybody about this tall, handsome, good looking state trooper that came to her rescue and absolutely made her day in an otherwise frightening and sort of tragic environment. Not to say that there aren't lousy criminal police officers out there. They are, because we draw them from the same pool of humanity that we draw teachers and preachers and educators and athletes from. And there's bound to be some bad apples. But for me, I can't control that behavior, but I can certainly control what I present, what I promote, what I carry by setting an example for people that meet me that say, he's a little different in a good way.
Well, thank you, Fitz. It's 3:08. I think people have reached their limit,
Yeah, and they're nodding
and
off a little bit.
yeah. So for real quick, 30 seconds to give us, or I didn't give you the opportunity, so I'll give you a minute. Please introduce yourself again, and give us kind of like an elongated elevator speech, if you will. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I loved law enforcement because it gave me an opportunity to serve. But what I didn't enjoy was the reactive nature of law enforcement. That is responding to a crisis. I wanted to get ahead of the curve. And I thought long and hard at the end of those 15 years as to whether or not I wanted to get into education. But then I realized what they pay teachers. And I had a family of 4 sons and a wife who was a stay-at-home mom who I needed to support, and I simply couldn't live on the salary of a public education teacher. So a very dear friend of mine said, you ought to get into safety because it gives you an opportunity to educate people about how they can keep themselves safe. And you may or may not know it, but you could prevent a tragedy by talking to them. And certainly I found that as an educator at the academy, as an instructor, I had a chance to sort of mold the clay in these young trooper cadets that were going out onto the road all by themselves in a way that sort of promulgated that sense of tradition and professionalism, and hopefully instill in them this objective to serve with humility. And so when it came time for me to leave that service role and get into education, safety for me was just a natural pursuit. So I've obtained my certified safety professional classification, which is sort of the Oscar, if you will, for those of us in the safety business, because of the rigorous testing and certification requirements for that. I've also attained literally every conceivable opportunity to either distance learn or in-person learn through FEMA about emergency preparedness. It's sort of the redheaded stepchild in the public sector. Nobody wants to be in charge of emergency preparedness. And I savored that opportunity to be the guy that got to run those programs. So I've cut my teeth and really, I think, developed an expertise in that discipline. And finally, when it comes to this opportunity on campus, it's a chance for me to sort of share my wealth of experiences with adults in an environment where they want to feel safe, where they want to feel protected, where they want to feel that a 6'7" guy can play the role of sort of big brother for them on campus and be looking out for them, for their personal safety, their professional safety, their physical safety, as well as be a resource for them about larger questions that they might have about emergency preparedness, safety, and maybe de-escalation techniques for combative individuals. I hope it's a perfect marriage. I believe that I fit the requirements of the individual that you're looking for, but obviously based on the level of interest from all of you, this is a very serious, very important position. And I want to make sure that you're as happy with the groom as I am with the bride.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a good stopping point. I believe you mentioned that Jasmine has already got a hold of you or contacted you for the next step, which would be the interview with Terrence Dow and Dr. Crawford. I believe
That's
that's
correct.
correct. Okay. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a good day.
Thanks to everybody for setting time aside to say hi and check in. It means a great deal to me.
Okay.
Have a great rest of the week.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. You too. Bye-bye.